All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Earn Your Runtime. Today, we are going to be talking about the Minecraft movie. Before I get into the episode, I've been going through some things geopolitically. My country has been dealing with some things. I'm not going to speak too much about it just because I don't want to spread any information that is not truthful or make any assumptions about things. But I'm good, and I just want to say I hope everyone who is affected by this is doing okay. If you are from in the Middle East right now, it's scary, but I hope everyone is safe and that your family members are safe. But aside from that, we're going to talk about the Minecraft movie today. It was released last year. The director is Jared Hess, who made Napoleon Dynamite, which is interesting. I don't know what my expectations for this movie was when I first heard that Jared Hess was going to be directing it. I suppose I felt a little more positive about it just because I do think Napoleon Dynamite's a fun movie, and I figured if anybody was going to make a Minecraft movie and maybe make it somewhat fun and interesting or different, Jared Hess would probably be someone that would be right for the job. Obviously starring Jack Black, Jason Momoa, Danielle Brooks, and Emma Myers. I believe, what's her name? Emma Myers was in Wednesday. I think that's what I know her from. I know she's been in a bit more recently. But, this is kind of it's like Hollywood officially attempting to turn kind of the most creative game ever made into a more structured narrative. And, that comes along with a lot of challenges. Minecraft doesn't really have a through storyline or through line through its story. I guess you have like the Ender Dragon and you have some little story elements mixed in there, but there's no real protagonist personality. Steve isn't really anybody that has any narrative in the games, and there's obviously no dialogue. Excuse me. But it's a tough movie to try to make. There's no narrative linear progression in the game. It's not a dialogue driven world. So the movie kind of has to invent a plot, right? Invent characters and decide on the tone and decide little things like how blocky should the world be? Should it be should it just be a completely animated movie? Should it be a mixed? Obviously, they settled on a mixed CGI and live action. The basic premise basically is that this group of characters get transported into the Minecraft world. They have to, survive and build. And Jack Black at the beginning gets sucked in and kind of grows up in the Minecraft world and is very experienced. But there's a conflict that involves the overworld, which I think they're calling that as like the real world is the overworld. I can't really remember too well. But basically there's this like queen in the nether who needs this block, this blue block that I guess opens the portal into the real world. That's basically the story. Before I watched the movie, I kind of had low expectations. I figured that the movie would be a financial success. I think Minecraft is such a well-known property at this time, well-known IP, that anything you do with it that is mainstream is going to make a shitload of money. I don't think anyone was expecting it to not do well in the box office. The casting was interesting to me. I think Jason Momoa stood out as somebody that I didn't know how they would fit into this. Sorry for sniffling so much. I have some allergies, but Jason Momoa was something I was worried about in terms of fitting into the kind of world that they're trying to create. I feel like that's a weird casting choice, and it did end up being kind of weird in the movie. The other actors I really don't have much experience with in terms of watching their other work. Obviously, Jack Black. I've seen a lot of Jack Black movies. Growing up, Jack Black was pretty big. School of Rock and things like that were huge movies when I was younger. I did feel a little kind of, I don't know. I feel like I have a bit of a fatigue when it comes to Jack Black doing these game movies. Like I think weirdly enough, and this is a worry that I had for the movie, was that the success of the Jumanji movies was going to create this genre of movies where, hey, we have a board game, or, you know, hey, Warner Brothers owns Candyland and we need to make a Candyland movie because Jumanji did well. And unfortunately, I think that's kind of what has been happening. You know, I think the success of TV shows like The Last of Us and Fallout are going to create these, you know, kind of a power vacuum of studios trying to use these IPs that they own, such as board games and video games and, you know, whatever else, and trying to make them into something that's a commercial success. And I think, unfortunately, Warner Brothers kind of did the same shit here. It was basically the Jumanji movie, but a different, you know, IP. With that being said, I don't know, you know, I do feel like it is tough when we do talk about Minecraft because of those limitations. I can't believe I'm talking this analytical about Minecraft, but it's tough to criticize it because I also don't know what else I would have wanted them to do. I don't think... A part of me does think that maybe they should have just done an animated film, and maybe it would have been a little bit more... You would have had some more creativity available in terms of story, instead of basically you're kind of kneecapping yourself a little bit by saying, hey, we have these real actors in the Minecraft world. How do we explain that? And unfortunately, that kind of leaves you with very little options other than they got sucked into it somehow. So, you know, on one hand, I don't like this style of movie. I don't particularly think it's that creative. But I also understand that there are limitations you have to work with, and you got to sell the movie. And, you know, again, I don't know why they wouldn't have done a full animated film. It seems odd to me that your effects budget is already going to be that high. Why not just use, you know, digital actors as well? You know, CGI. A CGI Steve. It's odd to me. It's weird, but I also, you know, I understand they're trying to be different. So it's tough. I don't particularly like it, but I also know that there's a lot of limitations that they have to work with when you're trying to make a movie like this. I think, yeah, like, you know what's a good example? Actually just popped into my mind, the Mario movie. Why not just do that? You know, why not just do... We have Steve in this world, and, you know, maybe give him a bit of a background that we maybe haven't seen before, and just have it fully animated. You know, why have this kind of trope that we've been seeing, especially after the Jumanji movie, of they got sucked into the game by a magical item? It's a bit, you know, in my opinion, it's not super original, and I think maybe it could have been served better by doing something else. But we got what we got. I guess I'll talk about, you know, I'll give you my rating. My rating for the Minecraft movie was a 4 out of 10. It was pretty low, but I feel like that rating is a bit overly harsh. I do want to say off the rip, I did not go into watching this movie expecting something that would be good. Not good in a sense, I suppose that's a bad way to put it. Good in a sense of I didn't think the movie was going to move me in any way. You know, I wasn't expecting some deep narrative. Excuse me, drinking my coffee. I didn't expect an Oscar-worthy performance on anybody or crazy writing. You know, I knew what I was getting into. It's the Minecraft movie. It's, you know, it's not going to be something super artistic and thoughtful. But it still was a 4 out of 10. For me, unfortunately. I guess the weird thing about this movie is it does this weird thing where it feels like Minecraft, but it doesn't. Like a lot of the characters in the movie, like the villagers and the sheep and the pigs and, you know, all of these, I guess, animals and such in the Minecraft universe, they looked a bit uncanny. You have this weird thing where Minecraft is not a very graphically detailed game, but you're trying to make a movie that puts graphic detail on it, and that's always a weird place to be. You don't want your movie to look like shit, but also you're kind of dealing with a world that otherwise is kind of known to just be pixel art, essentially, like very, very base level design with all blocks. So it felt a little uncanny. You get that kind of uncanny thing, kind of like how I would explain maybe early 2000s CGI felt for a little bit, where they were just starting to experiment with it and animals would look weird or people would start moving odd. Like Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man movie is a good example of that, where they really hadn't done anything like that before. And so, a lot of the times, especially in that like first Spider-Man movie, you have those weird web swinging scenes where you can kind of tell like, oh, the weight of that is weird and he's kind of floating and he kind of looks weightless in a way. It kind of reminded me of that in terms of it, just something about it felt off. And not to say that it didn't look great. I think it really was an incredible visual, spectacle. It was interesting and it was very detailed in terms of the textures and the effects were incredible. But again, you're kind of seeing something that, at least for me, I've been seeing for the past probably over a decade now, right? You're seeing a different version of that and something doesn't feel right, It was almost like they like the sheep, it just felt weird. I don't know how to explain it. It just didn't immediately feel super familiar, I guess, and you're dealing with things that are very familiar. So it's just a weird movie. I'll get into the story aspects a little more and some other things that I didn't like about it, but it was just an odd experience seeing villagers that look kind of like villagers but are a little too detailed, and that made me feel a little uncomfortable watching. Not in a, it didn't like, I'm really nitpicking at emotions and shit here, but it just felt odd. I don't know how to explain it. And, if you've seen the movie, maybe you feel the same way, where you just look at it and you're like, I don't know, something about that just looks weird. The zombies, it looked odd. Everything kind of looked weird. Again, not to say that the visual effects were bad. It was an incredible feat, I think, to be able to pull off that movie and make it look good. But it's something about it that's kind of like, we're not used to seeing it look good. So you get that weird feeling that you just don't really know what to think about it. At least that was my experience watching the movie. In terms of faithfulness to the game, I suppose they did a pretty good job. They respected the survival logic, I guess. They didn't really talk about it much, but I feel like there was a line in there that kind of said the same thing as all the other fucking movies, like, oh, if you die in the game, you die in real life. I think they mentioned that at some point. But also, it wasn't a game. They treated it as like an actual other dimension. So I guess if they died, they would have just died. But I don't know. I feel like they were respectful in that sense of kind of making everything make sense. I think there was an interesting idea surrounding the crafting, where they kind of took liberty with that in terms of being able to like make anything you wanted, which I didn't really have an issue with. I remember kind of seeing some reviews online where some people were not happy about it. But I don't know. I don't really give a shit. Like I'm not the guy watching the Minecraft movie like, he couldn't craft that in the game. But I know some people weren't happy about it. They took their liberties to make it a fun movie. I think they understood kind of the base elements of why people like Minecraft. And I also think, we're in a weird time as well. And you kind of see this in the movie where you're kind of trying to approach two different audiences. So on one hand, there was a lot of humor that felt very child driven or child, directed. There was some humor in there that felt very much like, oh, I'm watching a kid's movie, which I guess essentially it is. But then you also have some more adult comedy in there that was kind of oddly placed. It's weird. Like they kind of sprinkled in adult comedy in there, but not enough of it. So when it did pop up, it felt out of place and almost just like it should be there. But I think it's also another complication of making a movie like this, where you have essentially 2 or 3 now generations that have all experienced the game and have played the game a lot. Spanning back to, I guess, me and my generation, or people a little older than me who played the game when it first came out and the very early versions of it, to, then the Xbox One kids and the Xbox 360 kids, and then, now the iPad kids. And, we're kind of going down the line in terms of generations. So you do kind of have to make this big, like, you're trying to appeal to a lot of people. And I think that's another kind of shitty reality of this movie, is that you are trying to appeal to everybody that has played the game, and now that's a lot of age range. So how you decide on that, I don't know, but they definitely tried to, and it seemed like their directive was to sprinkle in adult comedy but overall make it a kids movie, and I think that's fine. But again, the adult comedy that was sprinkled in there, I feel like was sprinkled in there so sparingly that it felt out of place and kind of weird. But otherwise, I think they did do it justice in some ways. I guess I'll talk about the casting maybe now. I'll talk about Jack Black as Steve. He I have no complaints in terms of Jack Black. I really like Jack Black. I know over the past maybe decade or so, he's been kind of this guy who ends up in these massive movies kind of out of nowhere. Jack Black as Steve, for me, when I first heard, again, I go back to Jumanji, where I think, oh, he's becoming the video game guy, and he kind of is, unfortunately. He's in the Mario movie, he's in Jumanji, he's in this now, and I'm sure he'll be in more. He overdid it a little bit, but it's weird. I feel like Jack Black does have the ability to play other characters. Like, I think Jack Black in the first Jumanji, I didn't watch the second one, but in the first one, I do remember him showing a bit of range that I was kind of surprised about. That, he wasn't just playing Jack Black. And unfortunately, in this movie, we basically just got Jack Black playing Jack Black. He had to sing in there, of course. He had to, he had his lines and his yelling, and it was odd. It was weird. It did feel like Jack Black plays Jack Black in the Minecraft movie, and they didn't really try to give Steve too much of a background, aside from, like, I think at the beginning he worked like a desk job and got bored and then yearned for the mines, and that was basically his story. So it's a shame that they didn't give maybe a little more to that character. And I talk about this a lot, at least with my friends and kind of maybe with my wife sometimes when we talk about movies, is you have to give me enough about the character for me to care about him, right? And a lot of other movies do this. I think it would be unfair to say, I think I was talking to my wife about it, and there are Disney movies that do this very well, and Nemo's a good example. Toy Story is a good, there are kids movies that are able to really understand what's important about writing and how much backstory of a character we should show, how much should we get them to care about them. And unfortunately, in this movie, I think they kind of fall into that trap of, we need to give some kind of explanation, but we don't want to give too much explanation because we do have these other characters that we want to spend time on. Like, oddly enough, they spent more time on the new kid who's in the movie. He's kind of a genius, and he's the first one that gets stuck into the Minecraft world. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I think it was something very normal. Like, yeah, it was Henry, actually. I do remember. He they give him more backstory. Him and the sister, played by Emma Myers, I think her name is Natalie. They give them more backstory than the Steve character, and that is odd to me when your whole thing is he's like the main character, you know. So it was interesting. I don't know. It's tough for me to nitpick movies like this because on one hand, I understand that they're not really made for an audience that gives a flying fuck about character development or writing, or it's a Minecraft movie. But I also don't think that just because you're making a movie like that, it's easy for you to cop out of kind of basic things that make movies what they are. I think at the end of the day, a movie is good or not because of how they approach things. And whether you're given the Minecraft movie or Toy Story fucking 9, I think there are these basic elements that you should pay attention to because, it does otherwise feel like, well, what's the point of this movie then? Why did I see it? Why did I spend money on it? Especially for people who paid for it. But with that being said, they definitely copped out on character development for the Steve character. They gave a lot of I don't want to say a lot. They give a good amount of character development to Momoa's character. They gave a good amount of development for the other characters. Again, it didn't particularly make me give a shit about the characters, but they definitely gave them some backstory, at least enough, I guess, for you to understand what was going on. I feel like the humor was... I talked about the humor a little bit, but I'll talk about it a little deeper. The humor for me was very not... It wasn't my type of humor. It was pretty cringy. It felt like it tried very hard to get these, I guess, uncomfortable jokes to the audience, but it was delivered pretty aggressively. The Jason Momoa character had a lot of jokes. He was kind of the adult joke giver in the movie. And again, like I said before, it was just so out of place. And it was so just awful. Like it's tough. I don't want to shit on this movie too bad because there are things that I do like. But it just felt really out of place, man. It felt so out of place. I feel like, I guess maybe I'll go into the theme a little bit more. I feel like Minecraft is a game that is supposed to represent creativity and freedom and building your own world and, imagination. I'm not sure that the movie really understood that or explored that creativity as much as basically, other than the new kid, the Henry kid, is really good at building shit. I suppose they touched on it there because he built a bunch of wild shit and that's, I guess the basis of Minecraft. But other than that, it wasn't really explored that much. It just, the movie felt a little empty. It felt a little emotionally empty. They kind of did the basic things that I've seen in every movie since the fucking beginning of me watching movies that are, these big budget blockbuster movies where, oh my God, this character died. Oh no, he died. Oh wait, he came back at the end for a big fight. I mean, there was a lot of that, a lot of, oh no, they're in trouble. Oh no, they're fine. And then, oh no, they're in trouble. How are they going to get out of this one, guys? It was very textbook, like, storytelling shit. But it just felt a little bland. I don't think it really said anything meaningful other than maybe at the end where basically they were like, just be yourself. And, I guess that's a good thing to convey to kids and anybody, but it wasn't that impactful. The movie didn't look like a YouTube fan film. I'll say that. I talked about the CGI before and how it was uncomfortable, but with that being said, it was incredibly, I guess beautiful. There's no other way to say it other than it really looked beautiful. The CGI was great. It all looked at, the highest quality that you can get for that kind of style. I think it really did look great. And I give them props for that. That is something that I did like. I think the movie looks great. And, they actually handled the live action actors in the CGI world really well. I think going into it, I kind of figured, oh, it's going to be kind of a blue screen, green screen mess. And I really didn't notice it that much. And that's a really big, accomplishment that I didn't feel like the fact that, they were in a virtual world really took me out of the experience at all, which is surprising. I think you run into a lot of issues when you place live action characters in a completely CG, scene or backdrop. And they did a pretty good job. There was a scene, or I guess a sequence that happened at night where I did notice like, oh, these people are lit pretty well. Like it was that thing where like you kind of notice like, where the fuck is this light coming from? Do you know what I mean? But they did a good job. Other than that, it really didn't take me out of the movie. I didn't think to myself, oh man, like, they're running on a treadmill, or oh man, they did a great job, and it didn't take me out of the movie. And I think that's a really big accomplishment. That's something that they should get praise for. I think that is something I do want to praise this movie for, is they did a really good job integrating live action performances and actors into a full CG scene. They did a great job, and the interactions with the CG characters were great, and the essentially the whole thing is CG that they're in, aside from maybe some props. I think when I was doing some research on the movie, props like swords and things like that were practical, but then a little souped up with some CG elements, like maybe some more glare, just maybe making it look a little heavier. But other than that, it was mostly all CGI, and it looked great. It really didn't take me out of the experience, and I do applaud them for that, because it's a difficult thing to do. A lot of movies have tried and failed, and even movies that are full CG have failed, and they did a great job. It didn't look like a YouTube fan film, It didn't look like something that maybe someone else could have made. It looks like, it definitely shows that hundreds of millions of dollars were poured into it to make it look the way it looked, and it looked great. Nether was cool looking. It all looked great. No complaints on that front, really. I think that it deserves the praise in that regard. When I do think about it, though, I just don't know who this movie's for. Like I said, there's a lot of generations they're trying to gear this towards, and I feel like I came out kind of not knowing. I thought about it a lot while watching the movie, and I didn't really come out with an answer. It feels really odd. It's a kid's movie, but it's not, but it isn't, and it is. You come out of it, at least as an adult watching it. I'm sure kids, again, this is for kids. I'm not going to sit here and shit on a movie that's probably made for, the 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds or even 13-year-olds. But even for them, I came out just kind of wondering what their main demographic was reaching for. But again, like I said before, I don't want to keep reiterating myself, but you are targeting a bunch of generations here. And with that in mind, they did okay. They did all right. It's a tough movie to do. I was surprised that they were even trying to make this movie in the first place, because there's a lot of tough choices that go into making a movie like this. Like, do we want it to be fully animated? Do we want the characters to be cynical? Do we want them to be fun? Do we want, what kind of jokes do we want? How are we going to film this? And, I'm sure they went through a lot of things to get around a lot of those issues. And with that being in mind, I think they did a great job, other than the things that I've mentioned that I'm not a huge fan of. If I do think about other video game movies that exist in the past couple years, Sonic comes to mind, Mario Brothers movies comes to mind. I do think this is probably the weakest out of them. If I were to do a quick comparison in my mind, I don't really remember the Sonic movie. I haven't seen the other two, but again, this is kind of a weird, unique situation, because Sonic is a full CG character in live action, and that's also hard to do, but I think they did pretty well. And, the Mario movie was basically all CG. So it's a weird the movie kind of lives in its own weird niche that they have to deal with, where you have live action characters in full CG. So, but if I were to compare, I do think it's probably the weakest. I don't remember the Sonic movie too much, again, like I said, but I don't remember it being that terrible, or at least, and it wasn't great, but I don't remember it being bad. You know, honestly, actually, I put like the Mario Brothers movie in terms of like video game adaptations is probably the top. I think that movie was really fun and really good. And then it probably goes Minecraft, and then probably the worst is Sonic. Just because I don't recall liking it that much, and I do remember kind of having a lot of issues with that movie. Not anything serious. Again, it's hard to be judgmental about these kinds of movies, but just personally, I feel like it's kind of in this weird middle ground for me. But I do wonder, you know, did we need the movie? Like, does this need to exist? Did it earn its runtime? Essentially, you know, like, is it worth it? And I don't. On one hand, it's so loosely connected to Minecraft, other than the main visuals, that I almost don't care. It's almost so different that there's almost no connection to it aside from the branding. Obviously, they have the things that they want to show off because they're using Minecraft, but I feel like you could have probably easily stuck a different IP onto this and it would have worked. You know, they had some stuff about the Ender Pearls and the Ender Eyes, and they had the mine carts, and they had the Nether, and they had all this stuff, but I also feel like you could have slapped a different IP on this and maybe changed some of the story elements of the crafting, and you would have a different movie that works the same. So I don't know if it really adds to the Minecraft legacy very much. I don't know if this is going to be something that's talked about as an extension of it. I think it'll probably be something that just kind of lives on its own as its own thing, which I'm sure was also a part of the plan, to make this something that is easily monetized, and you can sell toys and make some rides at Warner Brothers and all that stuff. So, you know, it feels different. It feels separate enough that I feel like it can exist, but I don't know if it needed to exist as a Minecraft movie, if that makes sense. Again, I know I'm nitpicking a fucking kids movie and I sound like an asshole, but that's the point of this podcast, and that's what I'm going to do. So, you know, deal with it, I guess. I really do think, though, that this movie should have been a fully animated movie. I think this movie would have been served a lot better without not only the story elements of here's people that are getting sucked into this world and this is why each character is the way that they are, and maybe just having, you know, just a fully animated movie and having Steve be this character that we get introduced to, and maybe get some background on that character. But the whole getting sucked into a different world and then, you know, having to decide at the end whether you're going to come to the real world or not, you know, that kind of thing, I think kind of kneecapped this movie a little bit and maybe made the story a little less impactful, a little less useful, a little less entertaining, just because, you know, you can kind of, I personally don't like movies where I watch the beginning and within 5 minutes of the movie or 10 minutes of the movie, I kind of know where we're going to go. You know, when I first started the movie, I was like, okay, they're getting sucked into the world. Steve's in there for a long time. He's going to have trouble dealing with the fact that he's lived there for a long time. And if he wants to go back to the real world that he left, figured that was going to happen, and it did. And at the end, he's going to decide to leave, but then something else will happen. And no, you know, it's very, I guess, you can kind of put the building blocks in your mind of where the movie's going to go pretty early on in the movie. And it's unfortunate. But again, I also don't know what else they could have done other than make it fully animated. And I think that would have been a better movie. But we got what we got, and, you know, you just have to deal with what it is. In terms of faithfulness to the game, I think it was pretty faithful, but not super faithful. Like I said, it was kind of separate. The quality of the movie was great. Rewatchability, I probably would never watch this movie again if I'm being dead honest. I think even if someone hadn't seen it and was like, hey, let's try it out. Have you seen it? And I said, yeah. You know, like I've already seen it. I probably wouldn't watch it again. I'd be like, I don't know. Like you can watch it on your own, but I don't really have an interest in it. So in terms of rewatchability, I don't think this serves anything for me, even in terms of just a comedy film or something that I'm heading to bed and I want to put something on so I can go to sleep or something. This probably wouldn't be a movie that would end up in that rotation. Yeah, unfortunately, but it's definitely a one and done for me for this one. I wouldn't come back to it. But, I don't know. Was it? I feel like I did hate on this movie quite a bit, and I don't mean to be that way, but I didn't really come out of it with a lot that I liked. I think there were a few funny moments. That's great. The movie looked great. I feel like that's the biggest point that I want to really focus on, is that with the story that they chose and with the limitations and what the movie could have looked like if it wasn't done well, it did a great job. And I do have to give him that, especially for Jared Hess. I don't think he's done a movie of this scale before with these kind of limitations, and they did a great job. Just kind of dealing with the fact that it's live action and dealing with the fact that, you got to try to, you really do have to make the movie believable, especially when you're dealing with live action people in full CG. You have to really put a lot of effort into making that seamless, and they did a great job. And I think that's where this movie, I think that's what we should look at with this movie. If you're really being critical about it, is how did the movie look? And it looked great. It looked amazing. And I do think that should be praised. I think that's all I really have to say about the movie. I don't particularly think I would recommend it. I don't think I would rewatch it. Give it a shot if you're bored and you're curious and you want to have your own opinion about it. But I don't think it earned its runtime at the end of the day, unfortunately. I think this is like the first negative review I've given so far, but it really just was a bit of a letdown. I don't think Minecraft needed a movie, but I think Hollywood kind of wanted to give it a shot, and that's unfortunate. But I think the real question isn't really if the movie was good. It's whether there should have been a movie, It's whether Minecraft should have had a movie in the first place. And I'm not sure that it should have or did or needed to be. I think you maybe, unfortunately, with this cast and with this director, if they weren't kind of stuck in having to explain why it's Minecraft, this maybe could have been a different movie. And maybe it was something that could have been a little better. But you're kind of stuck with this, this IP, just because attaching the name to it makes a shitload of money. And in the end, I don't think it was about the blocks or how things, if it was accurate to the game. I think it was whether creativity really survives a corporate adaptation, but yeah, I think that's gonna do it. 4 out of 10 for me. Give it a watch. I wouldn't recommend it, but give it a watch if you want, to have your own opinion on it. Sorry, I'm sniffly. Yeah, I think that's going to do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed. This one's a little bit longer. Thank you for the support on all the past episodes. There's been a lot more listeners than I thought there'd be, and I've been really enjoying this kind of weekly sit down that I have, and I hope to keep it going as long as I can. What else? Yeah, obviously, I hope everyone's safe right now. I know the world is in a difficult place, and you're watching this or listening to this, I guess, not to be reminded of that. And I hope that I gave you some kind of escape to what's been going on. But, if you don't want to hear about this, click off. I'm not trying to ruin your day or anything, make you think about things you don't want to think about. But I do hope everyone is safe, really. And I think we'll all get through this. And yeah, just be safe, everyone. Man, it's a difficult world, but I also do think that's the beauty of entertainment, is we do get to talk. I get to do this, and it's taking my mind off of what's going on. And you do have these movies and things to watch, and really in dark times, at least in my life and in general, games and movies have always been my escape and have provided me with something to be able to keep my mind off of the harsh realities that we're all dealing with and all living through. Obviously, some more than others, and I'm lucky enough to be in a relatively safe position right now. But yeah, I hope that everyone is safe again. And let me know what you think about the movie if you watch it, what your opinions are, what you disagree with me, what you agree with me on. And I will see you on next week's episode, which I'm not super sure what it's going to be just yet, but I have an idea. And hopefully you guys will have fun with that one. And I'm out. Thank you so much. Don't forget to rate the stuff, because that helps with the algorithm. Really helps me out. Give it a 5 stars or not. That's fine. But I'm going to end it. I'm going to stop rambling, and bye-bye.